Well, hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Adam, thanks for hanging out with me again today. And today's video is going to be about this little guy. This is the Dash 27 little monster truck from RadioShack. These are very, very popular of the RadioShack series. I think mostly because they actually hold up fairly well. Aside from the bumper, most of them seem to survive. The gear train in them is very simplistic and pretty robust, so I don't think there was a whole lot of gear issues as well. And it's a small little light truck, so the tires didn't tend to get flat spotted too bad. A lot of them you do see up for sale, they will have dented in areas in the tires, but overall I got a really good score on this one. But the topic of today's video is actually getting this to run with modern electronics. So I have retrofitted this with a 2.4 gig receiver to pair up with my Spectrum radio. You know, it doesn't matter what radio you have, as long as it's a small receiver, preferably 2.4 gig. That way you have a short little antenna. That way you don't have a ginormous antenna dangling out of a tiny little truck. In all honesty, you could probably hide the antenna internally. I put the antenna tube in the front just because it used to have the big metal, antenna on it. So, just aesthetics. But overall, it's a straightforward, easy to do build. You don't have to have a lot of elaborate tools. And I did this intentionally to use the simplest tools and the simplest techniques to show you can get it running without a whole lot of specialty tools. You don't need a high-end soldering station or anything like that. Actually, there was no soldering involved with this. And I'll actually explain that here in a minute. So real quick, before we dive into actually doing this, I just want to give you guys some helpful tips. When you guys are looking at these online, if you plan on converting them, if you've seen a video like this, or you have the means to convert it, look for the ones with gnarly battery terminals in them or missing radios and stuff like that. That will help you find one at a little bit cheaper price, because if it comes with the radio and the battery terminals are nice and clean and the tires aren't flat spotted, they're going to charge a premium for it because they know they can get it, because people want to get those originals, and if they're in really good condition, leave them as originals. But if it has gnarly battery terminals, there's a lot of corrosion in the pictures and everything, and you're going to gut it and replace the electronics, watch it, see how high up it goes. If it doesn't go up very high, bid on it, you may get it for a great price. A lot of them do sell at the very end, so you do have to be diligent to watch them. But anyway, just a helpful tip. So what you need to do to convert this is, first we need to remove the body. There are 2 screws back in the corners of the bed back here, and then there are 2 screws right behind the battery tray on the bottom. And after you get those 2 out, the body will lift right off. Now, a word of warning, when you lift this body off, there is a good possibility this is going to fall off with it. That's fine. Basically, there's a slot down here that the bottom of the grill goes into, and it kind of snaps into the front end. So you can set this aside, put it back in later. Now, I can't remove the body completely because I do have the ESC switch glued into the bottom of the truck. But as you can see, there's no more electronics. So we have performed a complete gutectomy of the factory servo, factory board, antenna, charge port, LED, switch. It's all here. I knew I was not going to go back and revert this back to original, so all I did was go where the electric terminals are for the batteries. There's 2 on each side, and just snip those right off. And then you come up, basically take 2 screws out of, well, you take 1 screw out of the board and 2 screws out of the servo, and everything just kind of comes right out. So you do have to remove the other stuff like the switch and the charge port and everything like that. But overall, it comes out very cleanly and very simply. I'm going to jump to the overhead camera just to make this a little bit easier, and then we'll come back out to this view here in a moment. Alright, hopefully the mic isn't getting blown out because it's right in my face. But like I said, the grill just pops out. There's a little slot here that slots down in the bottom, and this little lip goes in behind the body and kind of tucks in there. These are all your electronics that have been gutted out, and this little weird servo saver thing here, we'll have to talk about that here in a minute. So I'll be sticking in some still footage as well. But basically, what you have to do is the stock motor stays in place. The stock wiring stays in place. Now what I've done is I have connected the stock motor leads with the ESC output leads. So what I did is I cut off about a 1/2 inch of the protective plastic sheathing and then twisted the wires tight, and then I actually twisted the positive and the negative, and you can test those before you make them solid. So I do not remember off the top of my head which is which. I believe the brown was the negative and the gray was the positive, but don't quote me on that. You'll have to test yours. And you know, yours may not even have those 2 color wires on there. It may be something completely different. They changed, they got parts from all over the place to make these, so your wires may look a little bit different. But basically I twisted those together, heat shrinked it at the twist with a piece of heat shrink that was very tight, and then I've actually folded those wires over, so now the wires come up and are folded over and come back out, and where those soldered area or where the twisted parts are in the middle, so everything is held in there nice and tight and won't come undone. Because a lot of times when you just twist wires together, you know, it's jerking and bouncing and hopping around in here, and eventually those 2 wires will work themselves loose. But by putting an extra big piece of shrink wrap around all of the stuff together and having it folded over, there's no really chance of any of that coming apart. The switch went back in the original switch location, and I made sure that the off is off and on is on, and all I did was just get these switch lined up in the middle. These are almost identical to like the little Hobby Wing switches. They're really small little switches. I did have to trim off, there was a little ring molded into the body where the switch goes in, and I had to trim that off with a pair of snips all the way around. So now the bottom of this was nice and flush. I put a couple of dabs of super glue just to hold it in place temporarily, make sure I could get it where I wanted it, popped it in place, and then I put E6000 liquid cement around the outside and let that cure overnight. So now the switch is in there nice and snug, and you can just turn it on and off from up here. You don't have to worry about it pushing in or breaking off. The little ESC is a 30 amp micro ESC I got off of Amazon. I'll put a link down below if you're interested. But the battery wire comes, the input comes right here. It's zip tied to this post and fed down through the center. That way when you open up the battery tray underneath, there is a slot just big enough to put in one of these Urgenix 1000 milliamp 2S LiPo batteries. They have the little JST plugs on, which is what comes with the little micro ESC, so that worked out great. And if you hear some humming in the background, I'm actually charging the other one so we can go out and run this. I have my receiver mounted up here. I just need to find somewhere to put it, and that seemed like a good enough place. The ESC and the servo are mounted into the ESC, or into the receiver. All of this was really easy. Here is where you'll have to spend some time. So I wish I'd recorded this while I was doing it. But anyway, in there is a full-size servo, and the servo horn that came with it, it's just a standard straight horn. And the way that this steering works is there is a little U-shaped bracket underneath there. And here, let me get my little demonstrator. So this little piece that drives the steering back and forth, you can kind of see it moving back and forth in there. All that is a piece of plastic that has a little U-shaped notch cut in it. Something like that. And then the servo, come on thing, the servo sits in like this and moves that piece back and forth. And you can see how much slop is in this. It's designed to have that much slop, so as you're driving, the little tires can move back and forth as they hit things and not beat up on the gear train of this servo. But I didn't want that much play. I mean, it's literally just floppy. I did not want that much play in my servo. So the servo horn, so this has a straight servo horn mounted to it. It goes down. There is a nut and bolt going through the servo into the servo horn, and on that nut and bolt there is actually a brass shoulder spacer for a pair of, you know, Tamiya shocks. Now that one you will have to have on hand. The nut and the bolt and the servo horn and all that stuff, you'll have to have that on hand. But you know, it's just one of those things. If you're planning on tinkering with this, you probably already have a pile of nuts and bolts and weird stuff like that. It doesn't have to be one of those little brass pieces. You could get away with just being a nut and a bolt and probably putting a little piece of rubber fuel tubing or a plastic tubing or something around there. All you need is just something that's not going to chew into that little plastic bit, so you don't want to wear out that little notch in there as it's going back and forth. So that little brass piece is nice and smooth, and it will hold it nice. And now there is very little slop in the front end. Now, to hold this down, I went very scientific and eyeballed the distance that I needed to raise the servo up, because there's actually a piece of wood underneath of that. So the little piece of wood underneath of that, 7.58 millimeters, or 19/64. So 9/64 works out to basically 5/16. So anything roughly a 1/4 inch or a little bit thicker piece of wood. And all I did was just go out into my garage and find a little scrap piece of wood that I've been holding on to for, you know, evidently this apparent reason, and cut it to fit underneath of the servo. And in the top is just a piece of aluminum flat bar. It's 1/8 inch aluminum flat bar, 1/2 inch thick or 1/2 inch wide. And I just drilled a hole on each side. There were actually posts in the body where these two holes meet up. You just need to get some longer machine screws to go down through the aluminum, past the servo, and down in there. And it's just held in by friction, but it is not going anywhere. And it's never going to be, you know, taking that much abuse that the servo is going to shift around on you. I didn't over tighten them. I just snugged them down. And like I said, just the friction alone holds that servo in there really nice and tight. I really wish I could have gotten video of doing that. But, you know, I was running back and forth in between the garage and the house doing that. And, you know, it just did not work out to make a good video of it. But all it is a wooden spacer underneath. It could be a plastic spacer, whatever you have. You could technically fold up enough cardboard underneath there to press this down, but you know, something firm like wood or plastic would be the best way of doing it. And then again, the aluminum doesn't have to be aluminum, could be, you know, any strip of little metal that you have, as long as it's strong enough to physically hold down onto the servo when you put those little machine screws in. And technically they only have to be machine screws. They just 3mm machine screw worked out perfectly. So those were probably like a 20mm machine screw that I used. And again, if you've built Tamiya kits, you'll probably have some of those left over. If not, your local hardware store will have something, or again, find something in a shoebox in the corner that you've been holding on to forever. Now, otherwise, you know, that was basically it. You feed your motor wire down, you feed your electronic wire down into the compartment, and I'll try to flip this over so we can see. Your compartment opens up on the bottom, and then your battery connector is down in there, and there is just enough room to comfortably fit one of these little Ergenix cells down into the body, and you're good to go. Obviously, plug it in first. Now, one thing I need to do before I put this back together, and you guys may need to do it as well, is my Spectrum receiver has a very bright LED light on there to let you know it's on and powered up. Now, the problem with that is it sits right next to the body right here. So if you stick yours like in the middle somewhere, you may not have an issue. But since I stuck mine right there, I'm gonna have to put some black electrical tape or something around the outside of it, just so it's not lighting up the side of the body. Because I did notice when I ran it the first time, there's a big orange glow here on the side of the door. So anyway, let me get the camera moved. I'll get this put back together, and then we'll wrap it up here in a second. So we've gotten the truck all put back together, and while I was putting it together, I thought of one thing, and I know it's been covered in countless other videos of restorations, but one tip I can give you guys to make sure you're not damaging things, because you may have to take this body on 2 or 3 times to test fit it. You know, you put it on, you find out something's holding something up, and you have to take it back apart. When you're putting these screws back into the plastics, these are heavy coarse, you know, self-tapping screws, just like Tamiya uses. So what you do is you get your screw down in the hole, and as you're getting your screwdriver on, you want to slowly turn it backwards. And as you're turning it backwards, you'll eventually feel it kind of thunk down into the threads, and then start advancing the threads, turning it clockwise to turn it down into the, you know, post down there. That way you're going back into the original threads. You're not, you know, cutting new threads multiple times, because every time you cut a new thread, you're weakening that plastic on the inside, and eventually you're just going to end up pulling all the plastic out of it if you have to redo it over and over and over again. We've got it back together, and as you can see by the door here, it's no longer glowing orange. So I decided, instead of, you know, taping it up, I actually just had enough room. I moved it over to the middle and stood it up straight. So now it's in the middle. You can't see the light anywhere, so that's kind of nice. And in low range, you know, does pretty good. Doesn't want to climb back over it, but it works. So one thing I neglected to mention while I was showing you guys the inside is the actual steering. Now, the servo that comes with it has a very small range of motion. The servo that you're putting it on, or putting in here, has a much larger range of motion, and depending on your length of your servo horn, is going to have a much larger side-to-side throw. So what I've had to do on my radio is I've actually had to turn down the travel to 50% to keep it from trying to oversteer or potentially pop out of that little groove, because like I said, that center post is in that groove pushing it back and forth, and if you push it too far to one side, the servo is going to lift out, and then you're going to come back and your steering is going to be stuck full lock one way, and your servo is just going to be flopping around, or there's a potential chance you could break something in there. So just one, you know, thought before you guys jump into doing this: make sure your radio gear, you can turn either down the steering travel to like 50% or so, or you have a dual rate in there, or, you know, steering throw or something. You know, every radio is going to have it labeled differently, but you want to limit how far that servo can actually push those wheels. So this was just a how I did it video. This is not a how-to video. You know, you guys need to know what you're doing as far as cutting wires, soldering wires, taking stuff apart, putting it back together, you know, buying components and stuff like that. You know, I can put down a link in the description the stuff I used. It may not be available to you. You know, they may not be available anymore. I'm not sure. But, you know, pay attention to what you're getting, paying attention to what you're doing. And if you guys feel comfortable enough, it's not that hard. It just... take your time. If you start getting frustrated, just put it aside. Working on something frustrated often leads to a lot of rushed decisions that end up just getting you further down the road of frustration and annoyance. I'm going to wrap it up today, guys. Everybody out there, you guys be happy, be healthy, be safe. If you have any general questions, just drop them down below. Any, you know, build questions or whatever, I can try to answer. Converting other cars and stuff like that, you know, if I haven't done it, I'm not sure. So, you know, if you have some oddball RadioShack car, be like, hey, what servo do I need to get? I'm probably not going to be able to tell you. Working on these guys is the kind of the mess around and find out method of figuring out if you can or can't do it. Some of them you can, some of them you can't. Some of them are real easy, some of them are impossible. So everybody out there, you guys be happy, be healthy, be safe. I will catch you on the next one, and enjoy the little bumbling around outside. See ya. So we're going to see if we can climb the face of the jump. And as you can see, the face of the jump looks terrible. And I'm not fixing it because it's coming out. But let's see. Not a problem. struggled more on the clean side. All right, we've given it a start finish marker. We're gonna see how long it takes to get all the way around the track. I have put it in high range, so hopefully it'll get up the hill, but let's go. Well, that's my fault. I was watching it through the camera and, you know, wasn't paying attention. Trying to walk and talk, I can't do it very well. All right, let's stand from this side. Take two, go. She's bouncing all over the place. Okay, that wasn't bad at all. That actually might have beat the Cloudbuster's time. Pay attention, Addam. All right, that actually went so well, we're gonna give it a second chance. Oh, I screwed it up at the last second. Well, that didn't matter. The finish line's back there. Uh-oh. Alright, here's a gnarly flower bed that I've been working in for a while, digging stuff out of it and transplanting it. Let's see how far it can get through all that. It looks way better on camera than it does in person. Got it back in low range, see what happens. Pretty sure it's gonna get hung up pretty quick. Come on. There. Give it a fighting chance. I took a stick out. There we go.